Hanna, welcome to the Gravity Commons podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're chatting today about your devotional that you've written, and it's really helpful for me. I'm really enjoying it. Wonder if you could just tell us about what gave you the idea and impetus to write it.
Yeah, it was less of an idea, oh, I need to write a devotional. It just kind of happened when the current president assumed office for a second time and then kind of started barraging the sphere with all these executive orders. And I just found myself really reeling, right? Trying to keep up with everything that was happening as a person who, is not maybe directly immediately targeted by any of it, but also in an uncomfortable Venn diagram of several kind of enemy visions of the current administration, but concerned about certain communities that I care about and about everything that was happening. And yeah, I one of the books that I really read, I had already read during the first his first presidency was Tim Snyder's On Tyranny, which I found really really helpful.
Yes.
Right, here's a historian who really has intimate knowledge of historical authoritarian regimes, who kind of picks up on things that are happening and then gives us historical examples that help us illustrate and also parse through. I found that really helpful. But the where I found myself in that moment was also realizing that I didn't just need instruction and practical wisdom. I did, and I think we all need that still. But I needed a different kind of existential grounding, right? Like a physical and emotional and even
Mm,
spiritual slowing down, reorienting and coming to a different posture in everything that was happening so that I could then think and do. And it like first I was going on runs and in conversations with friends and entering spaces of prayer and reflection. And as I was processing, I started to draw on my areas of expertise as a scholar. My thoughts then started taking this form, right? And the posture of the devotional. So I'm not trying to offer a manual of instructions. It's more of a kind of invitation into that space that I found helpful for myself, a space of reflection and spiritual and liturgical journey.
mm,
Because I think that's what maybe can transform us and ground us then today, also for the thinking and the acting that we need to do.
mm.
You write that this book is really for ordinary people who feel uneasy about the rising authoritarian tendencies in our country. It's a it's okay to feel uneasy, right? I mean, I hear people sort of talking and whispering about like not wanting to buy into conspiracy theories or fake news or overreacting, and yet many of us in our own nervous system, I mean, they're like lighting up like Times Square whenever we read the news. What about this time specifically do you think warrants feeling uneasy about?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're frankly we're well beyond the stage of whispering and conspiracy theorists.
Yes.
We don't have to play guessing games when those in power,
Mhm.
like in broad daylight, right, start rehearsing military occupations in their own country.
Yep.
Yeah.
They start building paramilitary forces that cover their faces and only obey them kind of as a person rather than institutionally embedded in structures of accountability. When we
Hmm.
see people with power starting to dismantle other sectors of the political system, forcing other
Yeah.
branches of power by pressure, threats, or politics of retaliation to bow to their agenda, when they start
Hmm.
punishing critical voices and media and academia and issue blatantly unconstitutional orders that then courts have to catch up with and catch some of them, and then
Mhm.
start building mass prisons and taking away the rights of vulnerable populations for the benefit of public spectacles and celebrations of cruelty um, and
Well, when
even
when you put
say
it that
on
way,
I mean, even say on camera, right? People want a
yes,
dictator, so let's give them one. I mean,
yes.
right, when people tell you who they are, believe them.
Hmm.
Yeah.
We don't, this is not a media hype. This is not a misportrayal by political opponents. This
Hmm.
is openly announced and executed by the current administration. This is not crying wolf. I feel like it's not even the boiling frog in the water. Maybe it's where you
Yeah.
have kind of the transformation is so slow that it's kind of like, where's the turning
Right.
point and when do I need to jump and really cry? If anything, I think we're in this
Hmm.
version of history where the evil is hiding in such plain sight that we almost can't believe it, right?
Yes.
It
Yeah.
seems so surreal, as if we're taking to heart the title of Sinclair Lewis, "It can't happen here." Like this cannot be happening. So,
Hmm.
I mean, maybe I mean, maybe one of the oddest things at this point is, right, that most dictatorships in the world are much, much more careful and go to great lengths to pretend that they're
Yes.
democratic and constitutional and hide the true extent of their undermining of political processes and principles and institutions. And this administration seems to even openly embrace and celebrate and play with the visuals and aesthetics and the optics of no, this is a kingship, this is a dictatorship. We want to
Yeah.
perform precisely this. So and I want to say, right, whatever anyone may think of any individual policy of the current administration, right? I mean, we can debate up and down the merit of tariffs or the need to downsize maybe certain government sectors or to regulate immigration or crime in inner cities. Like on any of these points, we can have debates about what
Mhm.
the problems are, what the needs are, what the right policy is. Or even, right, the forms of gender and sexuality that should be protected or not.
Sure.
Regardless of what you think about any of these issues, we have entered an area of authoritarianism. It's not just a strengthening of a central executive power, but it's centering around a person, and there's a
Mhm.
need to declare loyalty and deference to that person. There are loyalty tests surrounding that. Those are the hallmarks of authoritarianism, regardless of what good or bad any individual policy does, right?
Yeah.
Um, because maybe there's a misassumption, right, that authoritarianism means you wake up from one day to the other, and there are military parades
Mhm.
and media shut down and propaganda is blaring on all channels and the police starts arresting political opponents. But even these things are happening.
Right.
So,
That's actually, yeah.
but technically,
Yeah.
authoritarianism just means, right, these effects will be very unevenly distributed. Most of us can continue to live our lives in relative peace as long as we step within particular lines and don't question the centralized strengthening
Mm.
of power. So kind of personal liberties and freedoms, although often more unevenly distributed, will
Yes.
continue. But the
Yeah.
truth is, most historic slides into authoritarianism and dictatorship have progressed at far slower rates than what we've
Yeah.
seen happening in the past
Yeah.
half a year.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm rambling here, right?
No.
But scholars are saying this. You can read the
Yes.
state-of-the-art scholars on authoritarianism and fascism, and they will
We're
give you the checklists of all the things to look for. And yeah, it's not a
we're
guessing game at this point.
yeah, we're basically there. We're basically there. So I do in your answer, I do perceive that it's okay for us to feel uneasy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So speaking of that, part one of your book is kind of directed at the person who's reading the book. It's about kind of preparation, taking stock of where you are, taking stock of how you're doing. I wonder if you could talk about why that sort of like taking stock of those things. Why is that an important part of actually addressing authoritarianism as as Christians? Like why do we need to begin with taking stock and responsibility for our own bodies and our own sort of uneasiness? Why is that
Mhm.
important?
Yeah, thanks. And yes, right. It's written directly at kind of the individual person. Obviously, many things have to happen at other levels, right? At the political levels and institutional levels. And
Yes.
but I'm writing this both as an individual and then for individuals who find themselves overwhelmed in this time, because this is
Mhm.
what I'm feeling. I see other people around me feeling this. Um, and so and it's easy to feel overwhelmed, right? And so yes,
Yes.
we should feel uneasy, if we should maybe feel more than uneasy, but I don't want us to be paralyzed in this moment and to think these are forces that are beyond us, they're so great, there's nothing we can do, and then either end in despair or resignation, right?
Yes.
So all the parts of the book together form a quasi liturgical arc, right? It's first a gathering and preparing oneself in this reorientation and grounding so that one is then ready to hear and receive and respond to a different word and message. And then a kind of
Mm.
deepening through the core practices of Christian faith, prayer, communion,
Yes.
fellowship, remembrance, storytelling, and then being sent out again in the world. So it is directed to the individual, but it invites us into a communal practice and into the shared wisdom of this faith.
Mm.
um, One can do this as a devotional over the course of a month, individually or together. But in terms of the content, I'm always trying in each of the lessons to pair a key passage from scripture with a historical witness. These witnesses come from 20th century Germany, around the rise of Nazism and the transformation of a faltering democracy into full-blown totalitarianism here. Again, scholars have discussed these parallels. I'm not trying primarily to make an argument that this is exactly that. It's just kind of these are the resources that I know best from my own biography and scholarship to offer something in this moment. But I think yes, the taking inventory, grounding ourselves, feeling our feelings, anchoring ourselves in our bodies and in our spiritual practice kind of is a way of not being swept away, right, by this moment that is happening and
Yes.
finding our feet in a different way. That is really important.
Yeah. Part 2 of your devotional, Hannah, moves into hearing the word of God. And you just referenced like drawing from your biography. So there's a lot of Barth and a lot of Bonhoeffer. Parenthetically, and maybe we could just like take a little detour here for nerd out for a second. But as I was reading your devotional again this morning, I'm reading through it one little chapter a day. I was reminded of the letter that Barth sent Bonhoeffer in the 1930s when Bonhoeffer came to New York City and studied for like a year here, maybe 2, lived in Harlem or worshipped in Harlem. And Barth essentially was like, "Get back here, you miscreant." You know, he chastised Bonhoeffer for leaving Germany. And then I know both men then changed after that. Like Barth ended up leaving Germany, and Bonhoeffer changed. Obviously, in his book Ethics, published posthumously, he changed a lot about how he understood enemy love, for instance, and how to. This is kind of going off the map. As you think about the witness of Barth and Bonhoeffer during the rise of fascism in Germany, what's one thing we can take from each of them about how to live faithfully in a moment like this?
Yeah, and I mean these are 2 figures that I've thought about a lot, just as they're part of my cultural heritage, but they've also been part of the kind of scholarly areas that I've looked at most closely. I don't think either of them are all the kinds of heroes that they sometimes get stylized into, but maybe this is one of the things that I find more heartening, right, to look at them closely as people who try to navigate really complex and complicated times and also conflicting sets of values and loyalties. And so one of the takeaways for me is just this overwhelming need for discernment and to make time and space for that, right, the letter that you point to, and then also both of their reversals in terms of the position in some way, not the political reversal, but what it means existentially for them.
Yes.
Should I stay? Should I go? From where can I? What is it that? What is the task that is upon me that will look different for everyone? And I think this is part of why it's so important to take inventory of our own thoughts and feelings, but also our own positionality, the kinds of vulnerabilities that we personally have, but also the kind of access, privilege, and position that we have that we can leverage, right? I think, I mean, in terms of the thoughts and feelings, this is one of the disconcerting lessons from 1920s and 30s Germany for me, that their demagogues and fascists were really able to tap into people's emotions and leverage and play them, right? In a country marked by deep economic crisis and historic downturn and real and perceived humiliations. There was a lot of wounded pride and resentment and envy and scorn and anger, and that was fertile breeding ground, right, for those who wanted to leverage these kinds of things to tap into that. So to feel and process our own feelings in a way to say, yeah, what do I want to do? Not, all the feelings are there and are good, but what do I want to do with them, rather than just get them leveraged by political movements that turn them into some cathartic moments that can turn violent really quickly. Especially in ages, right, where like we don't only have mass media entering our living rooms anymore, but we have all these attention-seeking algorithms that also redirect us in such specific ways. But so wait, I got slightly off track now. The discernment about our own different kinds of positions and abilities to do something. I think one of the frightening and hopeful things in this moment is if we're truly at such a scary turning point or sliding moment, then it also means there will be something that we can do wherever we are, right? We don't need to be like that person in that ministry of justice or whatever defense that has to halt that order. Wherever we are, there will be things that are coming for those around us. And we don't need to be the heroes of the story to make a difference in our daily life. And I think this is what I also take from the example of these pastors and ministers and Christians in other times to say some acts can look heroic, but it is also the question of how are you there for your neighbors? How do you converse with others around you? How do you build networks of solidarity with people in very different spaces that make a difference, sometimes of life and death, and sometimes just of survival for people around you.
Yeah, that's what you get into in part two. You have these discrete practices that are like you mentioned a few of them, but you like protect the weak is one of your chapters, and use your privilege and draw lines. And I know you already mentioned like On Tyranny by Thomas Snyder, and he gets into like 20 strategies in that book. But I'm curious, how'd you come to learn these strategies? And maybe pick one strategy and tell us about your personal experience with it.
Yeah, I didn't. I mean, it was all I said earlier, right? That I was kind of doom scrolling and then spiraling, and then tried to think, what do I have in my inventory and the things that I've learned. I've also had students push me, of course, like immediately that happened, and that was one of the, that immediately puts our learning to the test. Students coming to me who said, so we've read Barth and Bonhoeffer, and we've read the Theological Declaration of Barmen, or the Bellhar Confession. Have you not been preparing us for this moment? What do these things need now? Right? They pressed immediately, and I was so glad about that. And also immediately confronted with oh yeah, it is, can I distill what these things mean for this moment? And I'm tempted as an academic to give like long-winded analysis, but like if push comes to shove, what does this mean here and now? And so I just try to, and some things came very quickly, and then as I had some individual morsels, then others trickled in further, and also often in conversation with others around me, where that was like, oh yeah, but this also has to be said. And so it was less, it emerged less systematically, but weirdly it kind of then rounded out into this arc at some point. One of the maybe the the principles that to me is just very core, and others are arrange around it, is this of protecting the weak. It feels like an eminently Christian thing to do, but also one for which you don't necessarily need to be a Christian. Um, Maybe there are sometimes people who say, right, should we reduce the faith in this way to kind of a social or political act? I really love Bonhoeffer's poem. I cited in that chapter, where he talks about people standing under the cross and what the difference between Christians and heathens, that's the term he uses there, but so basically between those who follow Christ and those who maybe not, is, and he comes to the conclusion of saying all of us need God. All of us find ourselves also in the same kind of suffering, but the difference is some people commit to staying with God in God's suffering and not leaving, not just caring for themselves. But what does it mean to stay with God in God's suffering? And I am very compelled how both there's a recurrent refrain in the scriptures of kind of protecting the weak and the vulnerable as something that God opts to do in case of doubt. So much of the history of God with God's people plays out along these lines, and how that might also be a distinguishing principle, right, between the Christian witness and so many political strategies that center around strength and purity. And I think, I mean, personally, also this, and from the history I'm coming from, this is maybe also one of the things I'm drawing a lot on the example of the confessing church. So what gets stylized into kind of resistance, ecclesial resistance against Nazism, but mostly they kind of drew boundaries against an overstepping, right, of the state into their ecclesial domains, And they did not, in fact, right, go to full lengths to protect the weak in that time, mostly obviously the Jews who were persecuted, other minorities as well. But this is where later the Confession of Belhar picks up the Barmen Declaration, right? The Barmen Declaration, it said, yes, if Jesus Christ is the one word we have to believe, then we cannot ever give any political figure or movement that authority. But they did not go and say, and therefore we need to stand up or even intervene for the Jews. But the Confession of Belhar do that, the similar, that kind of consequence of solidarity and intervention later in relation to South African apartheid, right? And said if this is true, what we believe about God and the reconciliation in Jesus Christ, then we need to stand where God stands and protect the weak and stay with the suffering and not turn away. And so this is compelling for me both as a as a scriptural refrain, as a Christian principle, but also as something that in my own history was not practiced firmly enough. And so maybe that's why I want to lift it up even more strongly here, right?
I appreciate that because I just the the devotional of really inviting us into really living that out. Um, you go on in part 3 and 4. Part 3 is called communion, part 4 is sending, and we won't go through all of those chapters in each of those parts. But I do want to highlight that this book is organized by, like, in a liturgical way, shaped by gather, listen, communion, send. I have Anglican bones in my body, and
Mm-hmm.
so, but I'm curious, what's the significance of that for you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, a little bit what I mentioned earlier, right? This the sense of a different kind of grounding and reorientation that is both very personal and maybe intimate in the space with God, but is also a communal practice that we tap into, right? That has been developed over centuries. And you may have Anglican bones, but someone else may have a very different one, and liturgies can look very different. But
Yeah.
being taken into these movements and practices that have been developed over centuries of wisdom, that's something we don't have to reinvent, and that can give us a lot. And one of my mentors has this, so that in of itself, right, as a ritual and so forth, I think that's worth a lot. That even that makes space inside this current moment for something else.
Mm.
And then I think there's something also particular to Christian liturgy and worship. One of my mentors always has this wonderful phrase. He says, "In liturgy and worship, the church dreams a different world."
Mm.
Right? In liturgy and worship, we also practice and tentatively inhabit that different world. We do that ideally, right? We do that usually just for a time and space. We act, and it's important. We set aside time and space to uh, kind of get a glimpse of that different world, right? And live into it tentatively. But if we do so, if only for a limited time and space, that can also allow us to realize it beyond that, right? The gathering issues into ascending out again. We don't stay in that holy space secluded away from the turmoils of life. It is actually what equips us to carry that out, right? To share that with others, and to then we have practiced this, we have received this here. We can also practice it somewhere else. And so I think that's what motivates for me also the liturgical arc, just the general wisdom, but also I think it's kind of a formative movement. It's even a form of training, even,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
To live into this different reality.
Mm. Yeah, I appreciate your explanation of that. I think that arranging a book that's sort of a, like you said, an emergency devotional in the subtitle, but arranging the book liturgically, I think helps to connect the dots between our life, like our worshiping life as Christians, and what faithfulness to Jesus needs to look like, in our current political, social environment. Because a lot of our listeners, at least, I hear this question a lot, and I feel this question a lot. Like, we were raised on the kind of faith that says politics is don't get mixed up in politics. Like our Christian life is all about kind of our individual spirituality and maybe our life together as Christians in this little church, but it doesn't really have anything to do with, getting too political is a risk, for Christians and that kind of thing. So I think there's always a little bit of like resistance. I feel that, in my body when I talk about fascism or authoritarianism. I'm just like, should I be talking about this? Like, is this my lane? You know, that kind of a thing. And so I appreciate you bringing those things together, even in the structure of the book, because I think it is our lane. You know, we have to talk about these things. This is how we live
Mhm.
our lives together. And so I just appreciate the connections that you make in this book, even in how it's structured.
Yeah, I mean, we can, and there are those who say, and I would count myself part of them, full disclosure, right? Who says there is no such thing as an a unpolitical faith, right? If
Yes.
we're but even in the German Pietist tradition, and I really like this image a lot. There are those who say you actually need to convert twice, right? You need to have this conversion where you turn to God, but that conversion will issue a second where you are turned back by God towards the world. And if the
Yes.
God we
Good.
believe in loves us, loves the world, that will necessarily return us to one another and to how we live together. And so it's not just about, my personal spiritual experience or
Mm-hmm.
edification and sanctification. It is deeply bound up with God's history in and with the world. And it cannot be isolated from that. So yes, while I mean the faith doesn't and shouldn't
Yeah.
position us in a very particular partisan way politically, right? It
Yeah.
it necessarily throws us into these questions of living together and sharing the good news in this world with others and inhabiting that and realizing them in some sort of way, knowing that we're not the saviors of the world, we don't make it happen, but we should it should be reflected in the world, and where it isn't, that kind of should also be a source of unease for us.
Yeah. Yep. Well said.
There's Hannah, I getting to know you a little bit here. Even before we hit record, you mentioned that English was your second language and had no idea of that from your prose. One of the things I like about this devotional, especially this may be a caricature, but sometimes it can be hard for people who work in academia to write something that isn't for academics. And at no point did I get that from this devotional. In fact, the way that you're able to succinctly name things clearly and simply is and continues to be so helpful for me. Um, we're gonna close. I'm gonna ask you maybe like, um, is there one chapter that you wrote that has particular meaning or significance to you that it's like when you write a book, all your chapters are your babies, but is there one that feels um, most personal to you?
Hmm. Well, first of all, thank you for your kind words about my writing. That makes my heart happy if I succeeded in not sounding like an academic. Um, I think the chapter about finding calm in the storm was the first, and the one about the world making power of the word, both for good and bad, where maybe was one that was very close to, my things that I think about a lot. But many really, as I briefly hinted, sprang from communal conversations. And part of what gave me the most joy was to discover wisdom with other people, right? Rather than like, this is the thing that I've always been meaning to say, but to say, oh, as I enter the conversation with others who think about these things in this time, more things emerged that I wouldn't have been able to do for myself. And that was maybe one of the most gratifying things. So both in that process, but then also in the themes that emerge here, I found these recurring themes of friendship and relationship building, and that really, encouraged me a lot. Maybe the most personal in some ways is the concluding reflection about how where I tap into a little bit a different tone of the like, here's what here's where we are, and this is what things might mean, and here's what we might be able to do. It's more reflective, even a meditation, historical meditation about how many worlds have ended and the need to disidentify time and again our faith from the dominant politics as something that people have had to do, that maybe in different, and is true right from from the Hebrew Bible stories through the New Testament, through so many different iterations of ecclesial, political, and other kinds of visions through history, that people had to, when systems came crashing down, there was always this moment of disappointment and panic and almost an apocalyptic sense that with this end, now the world ends, right? Whether it's the end of the first temple or the Roman Empire or whatever. But also the sense that in some ways when that happened, I mean, to not to downplay any of the catastrophe that mean that these kinds of endings mean for a faith, and also like just for people, right, who have to live through ends of worlds, but how kind of theologically that almost, you know, allows us to open up what we understand God's promise to be, to become deeper and wider than that particular project that we saw it wedded to so firmly. So that's, yeah, seeing that that hard moment also as kind of this wondrous moment of a widening and opening of God's mercy is maybe one thing that I take away for myself and hope to be able to tap into more.
Yeah, well, that would be a gift, I think, for all of us. The devotional, again, is called For Such a Time as This, an emergency devotional. Hannah, thanks so much for being our guest today and for this great devotional.
Thank you.